30th November is today, 30th November 2023. And welcome to everybody here from around the world. We got folks here and from Europe, different countries in Europe, North America, and so forth. And a lot of people will be watching the recordings later. Actually, let me put it on speaker view here. There we go. So my name's Kelvin Chin, and I run this every month on the 30th of every month, except for February. Every month on the 30th, it's the same time. It's 12 noon Pacific time. I live in Los Angeles, California. So it's 12 noon Pacific, 3 on the East Coast, and so forth around the world. Do the time zone calculations every month. And we go for an hour and a half. I try to keep it to an hour and a half or so that it has a known length of time, because we could talk for hours about this stuff. And it's anything related to afterlife, anything related to afterlife. So it's an open forum Q&A. Now, today, it's going to be a little different. We'll still have an open forum Q&A. But in addition, we're going to have a little structure today because I have a special guest. And we have our special guest is William Baldridge, who you'll hear from in a minute. And William Baldridge, I call him Widge. That's his nickname. I'll give you a little background. So Widge and I technically met, he tells me, on 30th November, exactly 9 years ago. Right? It's 9 years ago now. Today, 9 years ago today, that's when Widge and I met, he tells me, at the 30th November event in 2014 that I was organizing. And those of you who've seen the talk already, and if you haven't, you should watch it. Excuse me, it's at 30thnovember.com. There were a whole bunch of people there physically present at the talk and so forth. Widge evidently was one of them. So I met a lot of people. I was organizing it, and that's why I jokingly say, he claims to have met me there, and I believe him, but I was immersed in organizing this thing, right? This event. So we've since, over the last 9 years, become friends and had a lot of conversations about especially the material as it relates to the 30th November talk, okay? Which I'm not going to get into all the details of how it came about and George Hammond giving the talk and so forth. You can watch a 10-minute summary of me giving that summation on my website, kelvinchin.org. Go to the page that says 30th, monthly 30th Afterlife class, or whatever the heck the page name is, and you'll see there's a 10-minute talk there. I don't want to use even 10 minutes of our time here because a lot of you have already seen it. If you haven't, go watch that 10-minute video and go watch the 3-hour talk. But we're going to talk about principles that came out of that 30th November talk 9 years ago today, that Widge put together in the form of a slide deck, a PowerPoint slide deck. Key takeaways, key points. So Widge put this together, and I said, great. And so let's do this together. This is a good platform to do it on, right? Good audience. And then we'll obviously open it up to questions, open forum questions about anything that relates to afterlife. But it'll give us a structure this time around. Okay, so Widge and I met there. We've talked over the years. Those of you who've read my third book, I have 3 books out. You can check out my website, my book website. But this is the third book, and in this one, Widge is in this book. William Baldridge is in this book. There's a story about William Baldridge in this book, and I'm not going to tell you the story because, again, I want to get going with his slide deck and so forth and talk about the stuff we want to talk about today. But there's a story in here. I'm just giving you a heads up. You can find that story that Widge talks about. Which bottom line is, one sentence summary is, he tells a story in that my new book, that corroborates experiences that I've had since 1977. I didn't even know about any of these stories that he tells in the book, about other people talking about my past life memories before I even had any past life memories. So that's the summary statement about that. You can check that out if you haven't already. So, Widge, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And before I put the slide, while I'm putting the slide deck up, you can be talking, kind of give us a little background about yourself and so forth. Go ahead.
Good. Okay, good. Thanks, Kelvin. Kelvin never wants to admit that he and I probably met in 1973. We were both at a teacher training course in Spain, same place, same time, but we don't have any memory of
I keep forgetting that. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the only reason I knew about this event, the 30th November, is that Joe Rep, who's on the call as well, sent me a flyer about it and said, you're right there in DC, you ought to go to this. So I went. I had no idea, I had no idea about anything, about any of this information until I was there. And it's funny, I was actually a roommate with Peter Griggs, who's on the phone call, when this really interesting event happened in 1974, I would say, where Peter doesn't remember it, but we all got this little, some information about Kelvin being. We got information from the head of the spiritual regeneration movement, which was a part of the TM organization, where the head of that said that the individual who was Saint Peter and who was Frederick the Great is also alive today and is a TM teacher. We were like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, and part of the reason it didn't make any sense was sort of resolved in this 30th November address, and that many of the kind of disconnects between reality and sort of what we thought we understood about reincarnation were just wrong before. So after the 30th November event, I really felt like I was almost like dragged underwater for 7 years. It took me a solid 7 years to process all the information, because there were so many sort of tectonic shifts in the way all of us, and certainly I, had thought about many of the basic existential and philosophical questions of life, like who am I? Where do I come from? What's this all about? Where am I going? What is the truth about reincarnation? Why on earth do Christianity, Judaism, and Hinduism all seem to have such common roots, including Hinduism? How can this be? Just many of the fundamental concepts that have continued into Western civilization from sort of pre-Western civilization were addressed in a really, really thoughtful and, in my view, convincing way in the 30th November talk. Like I say, it took me about 7 years to process it all. And I noticed one day, it's like, oh, I'm finally done processing that whole thing. Thank God, finally kind of have my head around it. Because it's a lot of powerful, essential information that deals with the most fundamental questions that we kind of confront in life. So I was happy to take a moment to sort of summarize some of the key takeaways, and these are not necessarily comprehensive. These are the ones that I thought of, and then Kelvin added one, and then George added part of one, sort of a whole slide, but part of an existing topic. You all may have other key takeaways. We'd love to hear about them. But this was a real collaborative effort between Kelvin and I, and then George chimed in with a point that we'll identify as his when we go through it. But that's kind of my history with this. I think there's a ton of really meaningful content in the 30th November address, and I look forward to walking through these slides with Kelvin and sort of sharing with you all what I think the key takeaways are, and then hearing your questions and responses, and maybe hearing back from you that we left out major points. So that's sort of it from me.
That's great, Widge. And one thing I want to add before we start going to the slides is, so Widge and I are used to both be TM teachers.
Mhm.
Okay. TM stands for Transcendental Meditation, for those of you who have been involved in other meditation groups and so forth and so on. So I just want to say right at the outset that this is not a TM thing, that, you know, we're eclectic and we welcome everybody. And I haven't taught TM in, I don't know what math is, but, you know, 40 years or something like that. So I still teach meditation. And many of you know I do that full time now, and I do this Afterlife classes and so forth. Widge still has a day job, so thank you, Widge, for taking a couple hours out of your time, because Widge still has a very important day job working internationally. So, but we share that kind of spiritual history, if you will, having been involved in the 1970s. Although we didn't know each other, we were involved with the same organization, TM, Transcendental Meditation. And the reason why Maharishi gets so much billing, we'll call it branding or whatever, billing in the 30th November talk, is because he's the one who brought up to the group on the other side, let's talk about this stuff more openly. Let's be more transparent. That's essentially, I'm just summing up in one sentence. That's essentially what he did with the other side, with his, these other spiritual leaders on the other side. And so thus these key takeaways and so forth, and the whole explanation, etc., that Widge has been referring to. So let me get to the shared screen now, Widge. Okay, can everybody see the slides here?
Yep.
Yeah, let me get to the slide part, and then where is it? Play from the start. All right, here we go. Okay, Widge, take it away.
Great. All right, maybe we can move on to the next slide, which has got the agenda or itinerary on it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so these are the topics we're going to cover. So maybe we'll just run through them sort of one by one. But those
so we're just going to lead the discussion here, and I'm going to make comments from the peanut gallery every once in a while. Go ahead.
Okay, so we'll go on to the next slide, which is TM misnomer.
Mm-hmm.
The point here is that one of the key principles that really came out of the 30th November is that this notion that anybody can, quote, transcend in meditation is a flawed concept. We don't transcend to anywhere. Our mind can never transcend itself. What we do is we experience different aspects of our own mind. That it's basically impossible for a mind to transcend itself. And that's an interest, a totally new concept. And it's coming from a credible source. This is Maharishi, who all taught us that we were transcending in our meditation, coming out and saying, actually, no, it's a lot different.
And just to be clear, in English, the word transcend means to go beyond. If you look it up in the dictionary, that's the literal translation. It means to go beyond. And so you can't go beyond thought, because that was the way back in the old days, we call the old days, in the 1960s and 1970s, when we were involved with that organization. That was the thinking, to transcend, to go beyond thought, to go to the source of thought. That was the phrase that Maharishi used all the time. And then he's realized, and he's rejigging his teaching, and now he's saying what you see on the slide here. There you go.
So we'll go on to the next slide, and it builds on this first slide. The topic of this one is Maya is a mistaken concept. But what Kelvin was just explaining is that not only we, and not only people in the TM organization, but all of Hinduism believes strongly that the world that we live in, everything we see, mountains, granite, lakes, sky, that it's all an illusion, and that this absolute, quote, with a capital A, that we, quote, transcend to in meditation is the actual reality, and everything else is just illusion. It's not reality. And that really doesn't hold up. When you take away the notion of transcending, that's gone. So this the notion of so in philosophy, you always hear about duality, duality this, duality that. And what we're finding is that duality is kind of the reality. And this unity concept, unified field, all in one, that doesn't really hold up from a logical perspective. So we'll delve into that more. Maybe we'll jump on to the third slide here, Dharma, Karma, and
Yeah.
Predestination.
And it doesn't hold up from an illogical perspective, nor does it hold up from an experiential reality perspective. So it doesn't meet, there's no reliable evidence. These people talk about non-dualism. You'll hear that phrase, non-dualism versus dualism. There is an experiencer and the experience. That's duality. That's reality, is what Widge is saying here. Okay.
And
yeah, go ahead.
And part of this notion that Kelvin is talking about, part of this belief set in Hinduism is that people who, people evolve, which is also kind of an old idea, and eventually reach a state where they merge with the absolute in this unified field. And what we're seeing is that there's no evidence of that whatsoever. Entities such as Shankara, Gurudev, Jesus, they didn't merge with any absolute. They're there. You can contact them on other levels through prayer or meditation or whatever you want to call it, but they're alive and well and willing to engage with each of us.
Yeah.
They're not gone. so if they're not gone, we're not likely to be gone. So that's a very big breakthrough and kind of a shattering of a whole paradigm that has encapsulated a lot of New Age and Hindu thought for years.
Yeah, and I want to expand that. Not
Yes.
just Hindu. We're talking
Yeah.
Vedic, coming out of the Vedic tradition.
Yeah, that's true.
And the Vedic tradition is Hinduism, and the other big group that comes out of that is Buddhism.
Yeah.
So all of this Buddhist thinking that you'll see, which is very popular amongst a lot of Westerners who've kind of, given up on, what they call traditional religions, they get very much into the Buddhist stuff. And the Buddhist stuff is equally flawed. It's as equally flawed as the Hindu stuff. And then there's Jainism and other isms. They come out of the Vedic tradition as well. But we'll just talk about the two big ones that most people know about, Hinduism and Buddhism. This whole notion of Maya and illusion and so forth is flawed. It's not correct.
Then another major sort of breakthrough in human understanding, as far as I'm concerned, that came out of the 30th November address is this corollary concept that Dharma, Karma, and predestination are all incomplete concepts, just inaccurate. Each of them, Karma, Dharma, predestination, fails to account for our own free will and for the free will of others. And in particular, they don't account for how the free will of others impacts on each of us. That's a pretty big miscalculation, and also is sort of intuitively obvious. I mean, bad things can happen to really good people. We see it, good, and it works in reverse as well. The effect of other people's free will is substantial. I mean, Calvin was, relating to the fact that I still work. I'm working on the redevelopment of Ukraine for my former employer, U.S. Agency for International Development. Who could have thought that Putin was going to actually invade this entire country of millions of people and destroy and disrupt their lives? None of those people saw this coming either. I mean, free will is alive and well in our everyday life. And there's just nothing you can do to account for the free will that somebody else has. So it really more than draws into question karma and dharma and predestination. It really outright invalidates them as viable concepts for how life works.
Right.
And I think, Kelvin, you and your work, you've been so steadfast and always emphasizing this point. I really have to hand it to you. Yeah, you never miss an opportunity to point this out, and it's such an important topic.
And the reason I think I'm so steadfast is because it was like a real wake-up call for me. When I was in my 20s and teaching meditation around the world and so forth, I really thought I could change the world. I really thought there was a possibility, a long shot, but a possibility that I could be somebody who could bring about world peace, because it was the whole world peace project that Maharishi called it and everything. I really did think that. But in retrospect, now I realize that yes, you can help and you can influence others and you can move the needle more positively forward for others and in the world, but you can't change other people from doing what they want to do. That's what free will really means. You can't change them, who they are and what their choices are. Their choices are their choices. And if they're making bad, unhealthy or hurtful or cruel choices, you can't really change them. You cannot. They have to change themselves. And for me, that was like a wake-up call. I don't know when it happened. I think finally George said it again to me when I was in my 30s or 40s or something. I'm a slow learner. And I was like, wow, and I realized, wow, it just sunk in. It made sense, and I owned it. And I didn't just intellectually understand it, but I emotionally owned it. And the freedom that I've experienced, and I think the effectiveness in my teaching, I think, has skyrocketed because of that. So, and then just to be clear, for those of you who don't know, Dharma means duty. That's a Sanskrit word, and it refers to this idea of duty or life purpose. Those are the English kind of words you'll hear people use a lot. What's my life purpose? What do I? And you can have a life purpose, but that's you making it up in your mind what your life purpose is. It's not somebody telling you that this is your Dharma. That's the notion of Dharma, is that you have some Dharma that somehow is created for you. No, you make it up yourself. So that's why it's an incomplete concept. It's not incorrect to say that you can have a life purpose, but it's your choice to make your life purpose what it is, and you can change that. And the same thing with the word karma in Sanskrit. It just means action. That's all it means, but it has become a concept in spirituality to mean gathering good and bad credits, so to speak, in some cosmic accounting system. That's false. There's no such cosmic accounting system or a person who's keeping track of all the good and the bad things that you've done. There's no Santa Claus in some spiritual sense. Right? And yet people will think, everybody laughs when you think about Santa Claus. Oh yeah, Santa Claus is just a man. It's not real Santa Claus in the North Pole, but people think that there's a Santa Claus in heaven keeping track of stuff. It's the same myth. It's the same fantasy. We keep track of our own stuff, yes. So there are consequences to one's actions. And I make a big deal pointing out to this. It doesn't mean that you can get away with anything. That's what people think when they think that they hear me talk about there's no karma in the sense of, keeping track by some cosmic accounting system or some other person keeping track. No, that doesn't mean but that doesn't mean that there are not consequences. There are consequences to one's actions because everybody remembers all the good stuff and the bad stuff you did to them, and they don't forget. There's no such thing as forgetting. They'll remember it for eternity. And last time, as Woody Allen tells us, eternity's a really long time. Woody Allen said, it's a really long time, eternity, especially near the end. And the joke, if you didn't get it, is there is no end to eternity. So, and in predestination is the notion that everything is already figured out. Everything's already figured out. You don't have choice. It's all planned out. The universe is already planned out. There's nothing you can do about it. That's what predestination means. And here's the confusion that comes up with why it's an incomplete concept, is because you can foresee the future to some degree. The issue is to some degree. Those are the key words. You cannot foresee the future forever in all situations. But the closer the event is to you, the less to see in Widget's slide here, the less accounting for other free wills of other people impacting that event is going to happen. But the farther out it is, the more difficult it is to account for other people's free will's actions, because there's going to be more people and more choices that they're going to make. It's more difficult to predict something that's happened in 50 or 100 years from now versus 5 days from now or whatever, relatively speaking. And people will sometimes bring up Nostradamus to me, and I say, really, have you read his stuff? I mean, the stuff that people say, oh, so he predicted this and this. Yeah, well, it's so general, some of the stuff, that anything could be interpreted as that happening right now. Okay, so let's not go down that road. So there you go. For those of you who didn't know what Dharma and Karma and predestination were. Okay.
Perfect. Good. So the next one, we'll go through, and then there's a follow-on to this that we'll get into that George contributed. But the key point here is that our personalities, our individual personalities, are eternal, and they change, but they change gradually, like typically not rapidly. So our individual personalities are the same as our individual souls. We just prefer to call them personalities, and they're immortal. So we, as I mentioned earlier, we never, quote, merge with the absolute. We continue to exist forever as individual personalities. This is a very radical new idea. And it makes a lot more sense. It's logically consistent. I mean, as one of the points that George makes is that you can't be saved and then become eternal. You're either eternal or you're not. You can't become eternal. You've either always been there or you're never going to be eternal. So the point is it's kind of the only logical approach to this concept of eternal life. And it's true, our souls have eternal life, but they've always had eternal life. We've always been around and will always be around. Now, minds can choose to improve as their personalities change, i.e., generally quite slowly and over long periods of time. And the nice part about that is that once, for those individuals who do have some past life memories, you get to see how similar you were and how similar your friends were in past lives. We do kind of tend to seek out our friends over and over again, and their personalities are fairly consistent over time. We don't change that quickly.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
I was going to say we'll go on to George's part next, but go ahead.
Before we go on to the next thought, I want to clarify some things here. Mm-hmm. So some of you may look at this and say, wait a minute, you're talking about the soul being eternal, but then you're talking about the personalities change. And so is there something that's eternal and doesn't change, or what's going on here? Is there some conflict? So technically speaking, the soul, what we're calling the soul, what I call the essential me in some of my talks, is that which is eternal, because that which is eternal is uninfluenced by the continuum of change, uninfluenced by the continuum of change. So personalities technically are within the continuum of change, or not within. They are influenced by the continuum of change and therefore not eternal. Technically, personalities are not eternal. Souls are eternal in the way that we're linguistically using this, right? I may lose some people here, but personalities are so long-lasting that the way George and I talk about it is they are effectively eternal, but not literally. So souls are literally eternal. That eternal means, the definition that we use for eternal is uninfluenced by the continuum of change. Uninfluenced. Personalities are influenced, but as we say here in Widget's slide there, generally quite slowly over very long periods of time. This personalities can change. So there we go. So you can't really talk about the soul, which is uninfluenced by the continuum of change, but we can talk about personalities. And that's what we want to focus on going forward in all of these talks, is let's talk about something that we can do something about, which is our personalities and improving that.
So I'll read this next slide. This is really sort of a message to all of us from George. His point is our personalities change gradually. It's up to our informed or uninformed decisions as to whether those changes tend to be toward being more effective at being happy or less effective at being happy. Most likely, some of both tendencies are happening at the same time as we change. There's no, quote, perfect, end quote, personality that these changes are headed towards, because no matter how loving, intelligent, kind, and happy we become, the quality of each of those personality traits can still be improved. So relax and accept your personality as it is, whatever it is, and then have fun gradually improving it so that you can be even happier. That's a great message. I'll probably read that over every day for a while.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kelvin.
And what's the key about this is free will and choice is throughout everything that George wrote here in this paragraph for us today, right? Free will and choice, because it's up to our own informed or uninformed decisions. That's a choice decision. That's a free will decision. You can choose to be better, or you can choose to make yourself worse off. And you know people, and maybe some of you, if you're candid with yourself, have known that about yourself. I've done that. I'm candid with myself. I'm not perfect. Nobody is. And we all go through ups and downs in life when we make mistakes, and we kind of, skin our knees, so to speak. I use that phrase. We all skin our knees sometimes. And it's not a damning statement about who we are or about our level of intelligence or anything. It's just nobody is perfect. We all make mistakes sometimes. But some people, in George's language here, uninformed decisions, choose to make really uninformed decisions because they're very confused inside. And so what we're trying to do overall in all of our teaching is to try to lessen the confusion, increase the clarity, decrease what's called cognitive dissonance, increase the consistency in our thinking, and that's going to lead to what George says in the last sentence is making us happier. All right? Not everybody wants to do that, and that's okay too. Free will is throughout all of this. There's always choices that other people are going to make that they may choose suffering, and that's their choice, right?
Great point. So
and the last point on that is, why would they choose suffering? Because they're confused. They think that road will make them happier. They don't think of it as suffering. But you will look at them and go, wow, they're creating a lot of suffering for themselves. But they're still seeking happiness, but through a confused lens that leads them down what you would objectively look at and go, well, that seems like a pretty serious road of suffering. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the next slide is probably less interesting to some, more interesting to others. It's the notion that there are no states of consciousness. There are no states of consciousness, no enlightenment. In particular, this thing that a lot of us have been exposed to, the notion of unity consciousness or of a unified field, this notion of an absolute, is a myth. It just does not exist. Was a big surprise for a variety of reasons. Some of us had really even experienced for sustained times, some of the indicators of a particular state of consciousness. But I this idea of unity consciousness, I don't see anybody attaining. And of course, the hallmark of that is when you pass on, you merge with the absolute. And if that's not happening with Shankara and Jesus and Guru Dev, it's just not happening. So this both makes a lot of sense, but points out that this thing called spiritual materialism, something that Kelvin and George talk a lot about, is kind of a problem for many of us who are involved in different spiritual paths. That we can't get too attached to quote getting ahead in a spiritual sense. It's not like you can go spend $20,000 or $40,000 and get a new car and do the same thing on the spiritual side. It's just it's something gradually improving your personality so you're more happy is something you work on constantly over all of eternity. But this notion of discrete enlightenment is again just a myth. And again, one of the things that going back to the very early part of this discussion, when I first heard that Saint Peter had incarnated as a major Western military leader and a valued and respected political leader, I was like offended. I was like, wait a minute, why would Saint Peter come back as Frederick the Great? Like that doesn't line up with the sort of the Hindu way of thinking. So it's nice to know that indeed a lot of that stuff was a myth. So, Kelvin, over to you.
Yeah. Well, one thought that Sharon shared in the chat room, she said she makes a very good point. And sometimes people are happy creating suffering for others, and they're making others suffer.
Yeah,
that's their form of that's a source of happiness for them, because that's the whole cruelty notion that we talk about. That came out of that's something that we didn't include in the slides you'll see, but that's another major point that George didn't have time.
That is a major point, transcending cruelty.
Right.
On the November 30th.
All right, we'll add it in. That's the next news.
Add that in.
We'll add that in. Good, thanks.
Really good point, Sharon.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. That's back to the Putin invasion of Ukraine. I mean, it's and you could say a lot about what's going on in the Middle East today. It's just there's a lot of cruelty, people getting their joy out of making other people suffer badly. It's everywhere in evidence. Yeah, good point. So 4 major religions. This was a curiosity that I mean, I was always suspicious that this was the case because there are so many elements of the sort of the Vedic tradition that crop up in Judaism and Islam and Christianity. But the notion that all these religions share, all 4 of them share common heritage, and that a group of individuals who work together in what is now known as the movement had a hand in inspiring and starting all 4 of the major religions. All 4. We know there was a real link between Judaism into Christianity and Judaism into Islam, and maybe even some of Christianity into Islam. I don't know. But the fact that all 4 of them are linked, I found really interesting.
Yeah. Just a quick 1-sentence summary on who the movement is. And for those of you who have not yet seen the 30th November, you can go back and watch it and get more detail on this. But the group on the other side, who were the founders, we'll call them, or the progenitors of these 4 major religions on planet Earth: Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Jehovah, these members of the movement, these are the key members. There's about 12 or 15 or 20 of them. Jehovah, Jesus, John the Baptist, who was also Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in his 20th century lifetime, same person. Shankara, who was also Vyasa in a previous lifetime, and then Archytas in another lifetime around 500 BC, but in a more ancient lifetime, Vyasa. So those of you who don't know who Vyasa was, Vyasa created the Vedic tradition. So when you say, actually, we should probably change Hinduism to Vedic. But anyway,
you're right. Yeah.
Just notice that. But Vedic tradition, more ancient than Hinduism and Buddhism. But Vedic tradition, Vyasa wrote the Mahabharata, and out of the Mahabharata, it comes from the Bhagavad Gita is part of that. So many of you have probably heard of the Bhagavad Gita. So Shankara wrote that. So he's also a member of the movement. Vyasa wrote it in a previous lifetime, but now we know him as Shankara more recently, in the last 600-700 years or something, or something like that. So we're saying 600-700 AD. And then Gurudev, Swami Brahmananda Saraswati, it's his 20th century name. And who did I leave out? So those are kind of the key ones, right? And then there's another dozen or 15 or whatever. Okay, key members of the movement, and others have joined in their thinking of all of these concepts that Widge is talking about with us here today, like Yogananda, and there's some major Buddhist teachers and so forth, and others. So there you go.
So the next one deals with this concept in the 30th November address, which is whether God is the creator, God the Father is the creator. So Christianity certainly talks about God the Father. I believe Judaism does as well. The notion of the role of the Father changes. That's one of the reforms from Judaism to Christianity. Hinduism certainly talks about a creator God. So the point here is that God the Father of the Vedic religions and the Abrahamic religions is not the creator of the universe. The universe was never created and will never be destroyed. The universe, as we discussed earlier, the relative world, is eternal. So there is no creator and no destroyer. There's lots of change within the universe all the time, constantly. That's what we measure time by, is that rate of change. But the universe is eternal. And so this God, the creator, God the Father, just doesn't really make sense. So
this
that's
the energy cannot be created nor destroyed concept as well, right? Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Energy is eternal, etc. So that all fits in here too.
Right. Energy is never created or destroyed, but matter changes constantly.
Can take different forms, though.
Yeah, that's one of the 3 laws of thermodynamics. And then the final point here, and of course we'll add transcending cruelty, but the final point is that this long age of guru-disciple relationships has ended. Individuals associated with the movement will no longer incarnate as masters seeking disciples. Going forward, the paradigm will be friends helping friends in an eternal democracy. Whole new paradigm. And I think we're all sort of enjoying that approach here together today. It's just a different paradigm. Kelvin, George, not really interested in disciples, not interested in being a master. They're just interested in having, helping friends in an eternal democracy.
Yeah. So students are my friends. You guys, many of you are my students, and we're friends. That's how I view us, and I am a teacher, and you help teach me when we get questions and so forth. We all learn together, is my point, in our eternal journeys together. That's the way I've viewed myself for many, many thousands of years. And this guru-disciple relationship, for those of you who don't know, master-disciple means you do whatever the master tells you, whatever the guru tells you. Tells you to carry the water up and down the stairs 500 times, you do it. That's the thinking. And to a Western mind who doesn't understand what the guru-disciple relationship is, it may sound crazy, but there are hundreds and hundreds of, there are billions of people out of the 8 billion people on planet Earth. There are billions of people who believe that. And that's how they live their lives, by blindly following. So it's the blind following that what is the teaching, is the takeaway, is to not blindly follow anybody. But it also, I see your hand, Sharon, I'll call you in a sec. So, and it also applies to the divinity relationship that people have with God or Jesus or whoever. And we're not here to step on people's toes if they still want to believe that. People can believe in the guru-disciple relation. They want to still have it. It's okay. But what these movement folks, these key spiritual leaders are saying, they're not going to be in that role anymore going forward. So if you go and come back in another lifetime and you go to find a guru, it's not going to be one of the great masters, the great teachers anymore. It's going to be you're going to get the ones who've been sitting on the bench for the last 3 million years, who've been all the wannabes. But again, it applies to the divinity as well, and God doing whatever God wants you to do. Jehovah's Apology, if you haven't seen that, go to my YouTube channel. And he asked me personally, I don't know when it was, 2-3 years ago, to specifically talk about this publicly. His apology to people, saying, I'm sorry that I may have led you to believe that I was God, the Father, the Creator, the Omniscient, and whatever, and let you think that about me, but that's not who I am, and I want you to stop thinking about me, God, that way. That's what Jehovah is saying as of 2014, 30th November. Again, he's saying, but if you still are so immersed in that and emotionally connected with that, I understand, I'm not going to prevent you from it. I can't prevent you. You have free will to think about me, Jehovah, any way you want to. But he wants to promote the notion that he is another personality, and to be friends with him, not worship him blindly. And the reason is because it creates suffering, he realized. That's what his apology was all about, is that he realized that blind devotion creates potential suffering in the followers, because they will follow anybody then. And they may get hoodwinked by a cruel person and follow the cruel person who acts like, the sheep's and the wolf in sheep's clothing analogy. They put the sheep's clothing, sheepskin over themselves, and then they reveal themselves after you marry them that they're the wolf. But that blind devotion to Jehovah has inculcated a lack of discernment, and he realizes that has led to billions and billions of people suffering, and that's why his apology. So this guru-disciple relationship is really a blind following thing, and no blind following anymore. And I don't think it was ever a good idea, but they're explicitly saying this as it relates to Hindus, Christians, name a religion. It doesn't matter, no blind following. Think for yourself. Okay? Sharon, your hand was up, please.
Yeah, and just because it's said, and suggested, gently suggested or strongly suggested, if you think about it, 1776 to 50 something, I don't know, probably longer than that. There's slavery even in America, so that's given, like, okay, in the amendment, maybe 158 years. That's a couple of lifetimes if someone lives to 80, right, or so. So this mentality, this inner personality of being the slave, being on the other end of it, has a familiarity to it. So it's going, and as Widge said, there's a core soul, there's a core personality. It takes time to not feel familiar in certain roles. And I know that's part of it, where different lifetime and past lives, and the familiarity with, okay, maybe in a past life someone was a slave, and in this life they feel more comfortable having that disciple guru relationship because of past lives of that the relationship. So I'm just saying that it just because it's saying, hey, no more guru disciple relationships, doesn't mean that some people feel a little bit more familiar with that. I know when I watched November 30th and I had to talk with George, that I myself have a relationship with God, or Jehovah, but I say God. That's my familiarity with Jehovah. Viewing him as God the Father, and he said that's more than okay.
Yep.
If that's something that you feel familiar and comforted in, that type of relationship with him.
Exactly. So each individual, it's a really good point. There's no judgment of people's choices. Essentially, I'm going to reframe what Sharon said. so eloquently. There's no judgment of people's choices, and Jehovah's not judging you. I'm not, nobody. That's your choice to view your relationship with anybody, with your husband, your wife, your partner, your your children, your Jehovah, Jesus, Maharishi. Your relationship is your relationship, and that's personal. And Jehovah absolutely acknowledges everything that Sharon said as well. That said, he wants me and others, who else he contacted, I don't know who else he talked to, but to communicate that that's not where he's coming from. That may be where you're coming from in terms of, as Sharon so accurately points out, an emotional history from lifetimes of having a certain relationship and view of that relationship with Jehovah as God. But that's not where he wants to make clear that that's not where what his expectation is or his thinking is. That's all. Yeah. Good point. So thank you, Widge. And we have another good half hour, another 35 minutes. So let's open up the questions from anybody about anything that we talked about today. Thank you so much, Widge. It was a great, really good job going through the slides. Thanks for putting those together.
It's my pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah. But questions from folks about anything we talked about or have not talked about today, anything relates to either the 30th November talk itself or just afterlife questions, past life stuff, what heaven is like, or the afterlife is like, etc. Go ahead. Anybody? Speak up. Who wants to get the ball rolling? Harpo, are you here? You always have a question. Good question. Ted?
Yeah.
Ted.
Ted's here too.
Harpo.
Go ahead, Harpo. You go.
My grandson just came in and it kind of threw me off here. Anyway, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to someone and they were telling me that if you want to get by in this life, you got to pray to Jesus. And I said, well, I don't pray to Jesus. And he said, well, you got to be nuts. I said, no. I said, look, I'm sure Jesus is very busy on the other side, and he doesn't have to listen to my problems, And I said, I just don't pray. That's not what I do. Then I told him about you. And he said, well, does he pray to Jesus? I said, no, but he knows him. He's friends with him. Why would he pray to his friend? He just talks to him. That's all. And he looked like he said, you know what? You have to be insane. And I said, well, maybe you should tune into this. I said, look up Kelvin Chin and see what he's all about. I said, and I explained how, we're personalities. And that's what the whole key is. Anyway, I thought you'd be interested in that.
That's great, Harpo. Thanks for sharing that.
And I never did pray.
Yeah.
Like in the 30th of November, when George said, he asked, if you're looking for a parking space in Manhattan, don't start praying.
Right. Exactly. But, here's the thing. Have I been to church before in my life? Yes. You guys know my history. I went to the Congregational Church. Did we pray in church? Yeah. Did I think of it as praying in terms of a real connection? No. Back then, I didn't even believe in an afterlife, really, even though I went to church. They talked about heaven, obviously, in Sunday school. But I just thought they were making stuff up, I thought it was just fantasy stuff. But I realized that after I started having experiences that there was such thing as an afterlife. But even though I've had many experiences on the other side, and as Harpo said, I have a couple of lifetimes being with Jesus. and even when he was not named Jesus. So why, like you said, why would somebody pray to a friend? You wouldn't pray to a friend. You would just have a conversation with a friend. But praying, George pointed out something in the 30th November, and he didn't use the word begging, but George, that's what he meant when he told the joke about the I didn't understand the joke. I'm going to explain this to you. It took me a long time. You took you 7 years figuring stuff out. I think it took me 7 years to figure out this joke, to understand the joke that George made about praying during 30th November about the house always wins. I didn't know what that meant. Now, I used to live in Las Vegas, so I know what gambling is, obviously, and I used to do business with a lot of the casinos in Las Vegas. I know what the house always wins means, but I didn't understand what George meant in the context of praying when he talked about it in 30th November. And essentially what he meant is that if you go asking somebody for something, they can always create what you think is what you want. The house always wins. So they can create the idea that well, yeah, I you asked me for this, so I gave it to you, and they'll reframe what they gave you and make you think that you got the thing that they asked you for, because it's a way to fool somebody, is George's point when he said the house always wins. So praying in terms of that way is his point was of using that analogous joke, I guess you would call it, in 30th November, was to say praying in a begging way is always fraught with risk, because the house always wins. The person you're asking them for a favor can always frame things in a way that makes it sound like they met what you wanted them to what you wanted them to do, because you're in this desperate state. Now, praying in terms of connecting, that's different in my book. So one could say, and I don't say it in my meditation classes, but one could frame meditation as a form of prayer, because you're connecting. I'm connecting with my larger sense of self every time I meditate. And sometimes, as you guys know, if you've read my book, especially my third book, the most recent book about my past lives, I've had all kinds of connections with the other side during my meditations. And that can happen. So what better form of prayer in the terms of connection? Oh, look at the balloons thing. Did you see that? I did this thing with my fingers, and it zoomed as this thing. I didn't realize it does these things if you do a certain thing with your fingers. Anyway, what better form of prayer than to connect with oneself? So if Harpo, if you said it, framed it to that friend, this person, whoever you ran into, in that way, yeah, Kelvin prays every day, multiple times a day when he meditates. And you could say you pray too, Harpo, but it's not praying to Jesus in the way that person meant. No, there's no need to. Now, as Sharon pointed out, if people want to, that's their choice. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, the way I look at it is, how effective is your connecting if you're not really connecting with your larger sense of self? In other words, how powerful is your mind? How effective is your mind going to be if it's a puny little mind, a little 8-inch bucket I talk about, versus expanding your conscious capacity through meditation, for example? Wouldn't your praying be much more effective? I would say obviously yes, right? So anyway, that's a great point, Harper. Ted, did you have something? I muted you because I just wanted to.
Because you don't like me. I understand.
I didn't. Yeah, exactly. I didn't like I like you, Ted. I didn't like your behavior of rattling around. That's the thing. So it's
yeah, that coffee cup, huh?
Yeah, I love your soul. That is you. I didn't love your coffee cup rattling. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't realize that I had touched the mute
That's
button
okay.
it.
Yeah.
You know, wow, I got a lot of thoughts going through my head, and they're probably not questions, and maybe comments and questions. For
Yeah.
instance, uh, when someone, based on what you said the notion that someone may pray and ask for a certain specific thing, and somehow they think that that prayer was or was answered or was not answered, or they believe that was answered in a way that they felt was suitable or comfortable or satisfying. That's the word, satisfying to them. I just think that if an individual happened to pray about whatever it could be, for a Coke bottle, and they get a Coke bottle. Wow, my prayer was answered. God heard me. I think it would be deceptive and cruel, both to me, to provide an answer for somebody based on what you know that they want, knowingly that they want that, and and make them believe in prayer that they are going to receive or did receive what is beneficial or valid to pray because they're going to get what they want. If it happened one time or two or once every 50 times, I don't know. For me, I was thinking that'd be kind of cruel. I personally would not do that to somebody, because for me, it would be pretty deceptive, one, to have them think that they can pray and they can get, and I'll provide this for them because it's what they want. And I think it's cruel, both. So that was one thing I was thinking. Secondly, I was thinking about Jehovah. I don't I don't accept that. I'll be honest with you. His apology, because his apology to me is not good enough. Because for me, he had a whole impact on millions of people about being Jehovah and God, and then say I'm sorry and tell you to tell other people that. If
I
I,
I
I
hear
mean,
you.
you know what I'm saying?
I'm going to
Yeah.
make a comment. I have a personal comment about that because I basically agree with you, but continue. Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not true. That's not where I'm going with this. It's just what I'm saying to you is what popped into my head, what I was thinking when, if it haven't happened that before. But I was just thinking, man, that couldn't be acceptable because, you know, he would need to do something bigger. That's me, right? Do something bigger to say you're sorry. I mean, right? I'm sorry in the sun or something like that. It's just, me.
Well, I
But
hear you, Ed. I hear you loud and clear, and so um, the reason I agreed to state Jehovah's apology is because um, it helps certain people wrap their mind around how to move forward and think about him in a different way in order to help reduce their suffering. That said, I don't give anybody a hall pass, Ted, including Jehovah. I give nobody a hall pass. I don't give Mauricio a hall pass. I don't give myself a hall pass. I don't give anybody a hall pass. I don't care how powerful a light being they may be. And Jehovah, uh, is a very powerful, we'll call him a light being, and he doesn't have a physical biological body on the other side, right? I don't care who. Those of you who've been with Jesus and have memories of being with Jesus know that Jesus was not perfect and he made mistakes. And the miracles were a mistake in our opinion, in many of our opinions. But he got desperate. He got uh uh he got disappointed, really disappointed in the people not listening to his messages about the fear of death and connecting and praying in the way that I'm using the phrase connecting, but not begging, but the connecting way, and seek the kingdom of heaven within, which is his language for basically meditating. He didn't call it meditation, we called it praying. But all of that, so they're not perfect. Jesus, Jehovah, not perfect. And so I don't give him a hall pass, Ted. So when I say apology, I'm thinking of it, Ted, I don't know if this helps, but I think of it more as Jehovah's apology, meaning this is his explanation for where he's at now, and in his acknowledgement for the negative consequences and potential suffering that his allowance, and you could argue, Ted, because you know more about the Old Testament than I do. I'm not a biblical person at all. You could argue his either tacit or maybe more than tacit encouragement of viewing him as an authority figure and blindly following him, to Widge's point about the guru disciple thing. You could argue, Ted, I think this is where you're coming from emotionally, that Jehovah pushed that idea. And if he did, I don't give him a hall pass for that. But I view the apology more as an acknowledgement of a mistake that he made in the past. And whether you personally can move forward from that and accept his explanation, that's between you and yourself. So, and I respect that. But I don't give him a hall pass. I don't give Maharishi a hall pass for mistakes he made in his life. And we don't need to get into all the mistakes. Widge knows, and a lot of you guys know some of the big, major mistakes he made. Right?
Well, I have to.
Pass for that,
I also have to look at me for major mistakes I made. No hall pass, I agree with you. I don't give him a hall pass for that. But you know what? I was an ex-boxer, and when I see him again, he's getting the right hook.
You were an ex-boxer, Ted. That's funny. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, and you know what? He's laughing right now because he would say, he deserves it. He understands that. He would understand that.
Yeah. I understand that. I can move on. I have moved on from that. It was just the thought there, and I'm probably not the only one who may have
No,
thinking
you're not
that
the
way.
only one. You're absolutely not the only one, Ted. No. And it's a perfectly justified, understandable, emotional reaction.
It is. It's most emotional for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
No, I'm glad you raised it. It's an important.
He's still getting the right hook.
You can give him as many right hooks as you want. Just remember, Ted, you're not going to have a biological body, so your light body. I'm just saying. And
It'll be a light hook.
it's going to be a light
energy hook.
A light right hook.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's great. No, that's beautiful. Other questions, comments, anything? Anything else, folks?
Yeah.
Yes. Hey, Gyro.
Yes, Kelvin. Yes, I'm feeling like the idea of there was no beginning. Like in the presentation, you covered that we've been here forever. Something like that, correct?
Yes.
So that goes in line with what I was taught about that in Buddhism, something like that, and so this one teacher, he was taught by the Dalai Lama. He came up with this explanation that I like, that if there's infinite time back, and so you have infinite amount of time and a finite number of sentient beings taking rebirth, that means that I guess you could use combinatorics or whatever. So, you could predict that we would have been each other's mothers not just not only mothers, but we could have had all kinds of relationships in our past lives. But the Tibetans like to say mothers because then that when you see a stranger, you think of them, oh, that person could have been my mother in a past life, so I should be indebted to them and be kind to them. So it develops kindness towards all sentient beings. And even like a cockroach could have been my mother, or I could have been their mother, whatever. So all sentient beings are mothers. That's a theme in Tibetan Buddhism. That's only possible if there was no beginning. So that gives enough time for everyone to have been each other's mothers eventually, right? Or even many times.
Yeah.
If it's
So there's a number of different ideas in there. I want to clarify some ideas. That's a great point, Jaro. So this is a Buddhist thinking about the mother's thing, but the general, so we'll talk about that in a second. But the general concept, you're right, is that no beginning, no end. No beginning, no end. That's what eternal means. And we're talking about, just to be clear, we're talking about our souls having no beginning, no end. How the soul manifests in different forms will have beginning and endings. Like the soul manifests right now is Kelvin Chin. It's going to have a beginning in January 7, 1951. It's going to have an ending, hopefully around, I don't know, when it's going to end. my Kelvin Chin biological ending of my biological body is my point, right? But my soul is going to continue. You know, maybe I'll be here for another 20 years or whatever. But it's like the soul will continue even though my biological body will end. Just to be clear for everybody's, clarity's sake. I know you understand that, Jairo, but I'm just clarifying for everybody, right? So the soul is continuing. My personality will continue also, but it can change over time. So that eventually also the personality also will change, but very, very, very slowly, as we said. Okay. So, but my soul is continuing eternally. Okay. That I agree with that point you were making, Jairo. Okay. And that the Buddhists believe in that. Okay. That makes sense. And that there's a finite number of sentient beings. That also fits with the logic that George and I have together. Now, again, people can disagree with this and so on and so on. We're not here to try to create some new belief system that everybody has to believe. But that also fits, okay? And now, but there's a lot of sentient beings. Okay, we're talking about every human on the Earth and other planets, because you guys know I have lifetimes on other planets. We're talking about cockroaches, mosquitoes are sentient beings to some degree. They can't build skyscrapers and stuff, but gorillas and deer and eagles and birds and fish and all sentient beings. That's just on planet Earth. There's quadrillions of sentient beings. How many on other planets? And each planet there's I don't know how many planets have life forms on them, but there's some big huge number that's just ginormous, whatever it is, but finite. And I think you're right about that, finite. But we can take on all these different forms. And so you're right in the sense that I think your logic makes sense, that if you have all this time and you have all these beings and you have even though there's quadrillions of quadrillions of quadrillions of quadrillions of quadrillions of quadrillions of beings, a finite number, whatever that huge number is, finite, taking on different forms because energy is not created or destroyed. They take on different forms. Yes, a lot of people could have been your mother or my mother or whatever, could have been mother. Now, here's where I differ in my view. This is Kelvin Chin talking now, okay, Jairo. Is that I don't think everybody can be everybody's mother. I mean, in theory, I think it could be true in theory, but I think in practice it would never happen for the following reasons. because I'm attracted to certain people and I am repulsed by other people. And I'm not saying that the people I'm repulsed by are necessarily bad people. Obviously, I am repulsed by cruel people, if you want to call them bad people, but I am repulsed by other people who aren't even cruel. I just don't resonate with them. You know what I mean? They're not my, it's just, we don't resonate with everybody. So if we don't resonate with everybody, I'm not going to pick somebody to be my mother necessarily that I have absolutely no resonance with. Now, can you randomly get thrown into a family without choosing your parents? Yes, I think that happens all too frequently, which is why I teach in these classes to be more proactive in your thinking and choosing when you're on the other side to come into a family and research the family and the personalities of the mother and the father and the siblings, better before you make the choice. And those of you, who've had rough childhoods, you know what I mean. And if you've read anything about my childhood in my books, I don't talk a lot about it, but I talk enough about it for you to guys connect the dots that I had a very tumultuous relationship with my father, and I was really connected with my mother. That's why I went into that family, is because of my mother, not so much because of my father, okay? But she was already married to this guy, so he came along with it, all right? So it was a choice I made. But back to your thing. So I don't think everybody can be your mother. And this notion, the Buddhist notion, here's where I really disagree with this, that you should be indebted to everybody you ever come in touch with, this Buddhist notion of kindness. I think you're not kind. I espouse kindness. I am a big believer and teacher of kindness, but that's not the reason I'm a kind person. I'm a kind person because it makes me happy to be a kind person. I'm not out there worried that cockroach that I'm going to kill was formerly my mother in another lifetime, and therefore I should be kind to that cockroach, the example you gave, Gyro, okay? Or that stranger on the street. No, I'm not going to be kind and embracing of a cruel person because that cruel person could have been my mother. Maybe that cruel person was my mother. Actually, in another lifetime, Gyro, I'm walking the other way. I don't care. So this Buddhist notion that anybody could be your mother and that therefore you should be kind to everybody and anybody you come in contact, whether they're a human or a cockroach or an animal or whatever, is to just be direct with you, Gyro. You and I have had, I wouldn't say this to somebody I don't know, but I'm going to say it to you because you and I have had many offline conversations about stuff. I'm just going to tell you, I think it's foolishness. It's not only foolishness, I think it's incorrect and it's dangerous. I think it's dangerous. It can create suffering. You're going to go up to somebody who's wielding a knife and you're going to embrace that person because that person could be your mother? That's the Buddhist teaching? Does that make logical sense? I think it's dangerous. No, you run away from the person who's acting wacky and wielding a knife or being cruel emotionally to you. You get away from people, whether it's physical knife or emotional knife. People emotionally stab each other all the time. Those people are not part of my life. Okay, I don't care. Maybe they were my mother or father in another lifetime, Gyro. Maybe they were. Not only that, Gyro. Have you read my book? Have you read this book? Read some of the stories in this book about my past lives and some of my mothers and fathers. Fathers in particular, in my Crusader lifetime and my Frederick II lifetime. Read about the fathers in those. I'm not going to get into the details right now, but it's horrific. Okay, I came into those lifetimes because of the mothers, not the fathers. But man, the fact that they were my father doesn't mean that I'm going to be kind to them if I run into them again. I'm going to run the other way. You read about some of the stuff they did to me and other people. I mean, really bad. I'll just give you one little thing. One of those fathers beheaded my best friend in front of me. Beheaded my best friend in front of me, Gyro. Yeah, okay? As punishment to me, right? That's somebody, oh, Buddhist believes that you should be kind to him because he was your father. Yeah, right. Okay. Hope that helps. All right. Other questions? You have a follow-up to that, Gyro? Does that make sense? Anything else? Other questions?
I might follow up and say you should bring Ted around with you all the time to land a right hook in case you run into that former father. And secondly, I want to add that some of your kids were no prize either. As I recall, one of your sons became the worst Roman emperor ever. Anyway, over.
Commodus. Commodus was my biological son. There's no guarantees to who you get as your children. Now, when we're on the other side, we'll talk about soul plans. You're on the other side. You can choose your parents and your family and so forth and so on. We've talked a little bit about that. But let's talk about it in the reverse. You're now here as a biological being, and you're trying to have a family. There's no guarantees who's going to come down the chute into your family, right? You would hope that who comes down into the family. Oh, Harpo, that's great. I see we have a young visitor. It's good to see you. Hello. So there's no guarantees of who's going to come down the chute into your family to be your child, right? I'll tell you guys a quick story. You know, you guys know I have 2 children. So my son Jesse's 35. My daughter Sam, who's 29. And by the way, she's teaching meditation, turning within meditation now. You can check out her website. You can find her website on my website, the link to her website. But it's called meditationwithsam.com. But if you can't remember that, just go to my website, my Turning Within meditation website, and you can connect to hers. But the story is that, and this is a true story, Peggy and I had one child, Jesse. And those of you who are parents, you know that once they get out of diapers, whenever that is, I can't remember, is it 3, 4 years old? And they're out of diapers and they kind of a little bit more self-sufficient. And then you're a little bit more flexible in terms of the babysitters that I don't know if you guys remember when your kids were that young, or some of you have young kids, you're really like vigilant. We were like, oh God, he's only a year old. We got to make sure we get a really, really careful babysitter, but once they're like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, it's like, okay, they're not changing diapers and they're responsible, but it's like when they're a little infant, and especially it's your firstborn, Jesse, our firstborn. So now he's older, 3, 4 years old. We're like, we don't want any more kids. We're not having any more kids. We're done. We're cooked. We have a life again. We can go to the movies, not worry so much about having to leave in the middle of the movie. Yeah, to get home because the babysitter's calling us up or whatever. Sammy's knocking on the door. We didn't know it was Sammy at the time. She's knocking on the door. My wife is having dream after dream after dream. Peggy is having dream after dream. Every 2 or 3 weeks, every month. For a year and a half, this went on. A year and a half regularly. Every couple of few weeks, she's having a dream. She's in her meditation. Peggy's in her meditation. And this little girl's coming. And we kept telling her, you know what, it's really, we're touched that you want to come be our daughter, but go someplace else. We're done. We're not having any children. We're done. We're not having any. But, really, a year and a half, Peggy would be on the bus going to work. And then, boom, whatever. Just, dreams. Blah, blah, blah. Finally, we said, okay. But what we said to her, so this is, again, I'm telling you this story for the reverse. For those of you who are going to have children, this is like a little tip for you. We said to her, we said to her different things. Peggy said, if you come in, you have to be a real snuggly person because Peggy really loves to be hugged and kissed and snuggled. Okay, fine. And I said, me, the pragmatist, those of you who know my personality, you've read my 3rd book about my personality traits for thousands of years. I'm the practical pragmatist guy. I said, you got to be easy. You come in, you got to be easy. You got to be easy. And Sam came in and she's like easy and snuggly. It's amazing. So, you know, you can somewhat control these things, but not everything. And some of you know that because you've had difficult children, and it is what it is, right? All right. Other questions before we wrap? We're pretty much an hour and a half in, but I'll take another question if somebody has another question. Anything else? Anybody?
I don't have a question, but
Yeah, Ted.
later on, I don't have a question, but I'll share you the turning within theme song with you.
What's that? You're going to sing a theme song for us? What are you saying?
Yeah, it's called the Turning Within theme song.
Oh, what's that? What's that?
I've been alive forever, and I wrote the very first song. Barry Manilow.
That's great.
That's my theme song.
That's great. Thank you, Ted. Let's see. Any other things in the chat or anything? Let's see. Chat. Hold on. Let's see. Oh yeah, Widgew had written some stuff in here. Okay, good. Yeah, got it. Okay. Well, great to see everybody. Thank you for your your personal involvement, your questions and comments and everything. We'll see you guys next month. So happy 9th anniversary today of the 30th November Talk 2014. And if you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. Go watch the talk. And come back with questions if you have questions, no problem. Widge, thank you so much again for putting together the PowerPoint slides and leading us through the key takeaways. And the last one we'll end on is the one that Sharon raised, right? Transcending cruelty.
Transcending cruelty. And now we are back here together. So we've got some work to do. Just following up to my brother.
There you go.
Oh
Look at that.
there's fireworks.
Look at that. Fireworks.
Yeah.
How perfect was that?
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Beautiful. American fireworks, and they get Sharon singing and Ted singing, and we get the fireworks going. All right, guys. Thank you so much. We'll see you again next month. You guys know how to.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you all. It was really fun. Appreciate it.
It was really a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Welcome. You're welcome.
See you later.
Thanks. It's a good show.
Great.
Thanks, Joe.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelvin. Take care.
Yeah.
Ryder.
Thanks, Jamie.
Hi.
Hey, how you doing? So Harpo, who is this? I turned the
My
recording on.
grandson Ryder.
Oh, it's your grandson, Ryder. Wow, cool. Hey, Ryder.
Hi.
Really good to meet you.
Good to meet you too, Kelvin.
Wow, very cool. I've heard about you. I've heard about you from